I'm Lisa Birnbach for Howdini.com. Any woman who's been pregnant will tell you those 9 months of pregnancy, actually 10 months, can really start to drag in the final days. But suddenly the excitement begins. You're going into labor. Or are you? How do you know when labor is really starting and it's not a false alarm? We're here with Dr. Keith Eddleman, Director of Obstetrics at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, where I had at least 3 kids that I can remember, and author of 2 books on pregnancy, including Pregnancy for Dummies. Dr. Eddleman, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
How do you know when you're in labor? I'm sorry to ask, but some people may not know.
Well, it's a really common question, especially for first-time moms. One of the things is you start to have contractions, and they get closer and closer together. They last about 30 to 40 seconds apiece, and they become increasingly stronger the further along they get. And it's sometimes not easy to tell from the very beginning, but if you have progressively stronger contractions getting closer and closer together, then it's time to call your doctor.
Now, there are other indicators that you're going into labor that might precede or follow contractions, right?
Yeah, there are a couple hints. The thing is, they don't tell you when you're going to go into labor, but it tells you that things might be gearing up, if you will.
Right.
Things like what we call a bloody show. It's a little bit of blood mixed with mucus that comes from the cervix. Also, a lot of women have an increase in the amount of mucus that comes out of the cervix. It's sometimes called a mucus plug. Mm-hmm. And then some women feel like a sudden increase in the pressure in their lower pelvis, which means the baby's head is descending down into the pelvis. So those are 3 signs that are sort of, warning signs, if you will.
If you're being seen by a doctor regularly, none of this will be a mystery.
Well, in your last few prenatal visits, starting at about 36 weeks, your doctor is going to start doing internal exams to check the cervix every week. And you'll get an idea based on those exams whether or not your cervix is starting to dilate. Because a lot of women, it slowly dilates a little bit toward the last few weeks of pregnancy. Then when you start to have regular contractions, that dilation increases more rapidly.
When should a pregnant woman in her last days of pregnancy go to the hospital? If she doesn't feel the baby kicking, for example, is that a telltale sign to hurry up?
Absolutely. There are really 3 major things. One is if you have bleeding that's more than what we describe as a bloody show, which is usually very minimal, sort of like a period. If you have heavy bleeding, go to the hospital immediately. If you don't feel the baby moving, then you should go to the hospital immediately. Or even if you just feel that the baby's not moving like it was, like, I hadn't felt the baby move as much today, you should go. And then the third thing is, if you are having contractions, usually the pain goes away between the contractions. If it doesn't, if you're still having a lot of pain between contractions, you should go to the hospital.
How do you feel about induction?
It's a common fallacy that induced labor is a harder labor than regular labor or natural labor, and that's not true at all. The only thing we do with the medications that we use to induce labor is to induce a normal labor pattern. The strength of the contractions is the same, the frequency is the same. It's using a synthetic form of the hormone that you make to just achieve the same thing. Exactly.
And it does grow the way a natural process will grow.
Absolutely. You start with mild contractions. They're spaced apart. You make them more frequently. You make them more strong. And
you scream at your husband.
Exactly.
And it's just like anything else.
And then you get your epidural, and it's just like a normal labor.
Okay, let's talk about epidurals. I love an epidural. In fact, I had one this morning before I got here. No, why would a doctor advise against an epidural?
There are only a few situations where that would be advised against. In other words, if the woman has some sort of a coagulation disorder or severely low platelet count, then there's a risk in putting the epidural in. But those are really the only times when I wouldn't recommend an epidural. The overwhelming majority of the time, women can have them, and we encourage them. I agree with you. I think that pain during pregnancy really is not a necessary thing. It should be a happy process.
Right. Right, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Eddleman. We'll see you again soon.
Okay, thank you.
For Howdini.com, I'm Lisa Birnbach.